Hello and welcome to the first and hopefully only video for week 14 for CIS 224 Data and Information course. This will be the last time you have to listen to me ramble on. In this video we are going to walk through briefly at a high level things that I would suggest you look into before you take the final exam. The final exam overall will be 50 questions. There will be true and false questions. Some of them, mostly will be short answer. There will be some matching, so being able to match up different things and how they connect. It is a comprehensive final exam, so it covers all of our lessons. There will not be any sequel in the final exam. Well, there will be SQL questions, but you will not have to write SQL. There isn't a database that you'll have to download. The project and the reports that you create will be what I would consider your final SQL test. So I would use those reports as an opportunity to show off what you've learned or to demonstrate what you've learned in the course this year concerning writing SQL statements. So let's start walking through. The first thing I would talk about look into is the different information systems. Transactional management, decision support are the ones that we talked about in the course. There are others, but these are the ones that we stuck to. I would know what their purpose is, what they accomplish, and maybe be able to give some examples. Another note that I would say throughout the course is we've talked about a lot of different acronyms, like the three here. I would be able to speak to those acronyms as you walk through the slides, look at the different acronyms and understand what they mean, and that I would expect some questions on the final about that as well. Database management systems. What is a database application? What are the different things that it does? We have the three listed here, and then what are some examples? And again, Toad, Access, these are all listed here for a database management system, database application. What does it do? In a table, I would know what makes up a table. Know that attributes are the same thing as columns. Tables are entities. That's something that I would encourage you to review as you walk through. Access, we talked about the pros and cons of Access, and you've used Access throughout this entire course, so you may have some pros and cons that we haven't discussed. I would know what those pros and cons are, especially the ones discussed in class, and be able to speak to that in a question for the final. And those are the cons. What is a database? I would know the attributes of what makes up a relational database and be able to speak to what each one of them means. Legacy databases, we talked about these. I would want you to know what the different ones are, and then maybe at just sort of a high level of each one accomplished, and then sort of the order that they were in that we talked about and is listed here. And what's the benefit? What's the benefit of an object-oriented over a relational database? Standardization. I preached about this throughout the entire course, and we just had at work an individual that did not follow standardization, did not write things out the way that they're supposed to be written, and they crashed the production server, and it cost for the entire Northeast Division. Please, as you write your code, as you go through your code, do not be that person. Speaking for standardization, I would be able to explain what are the advantages of standardization. I would be able to look at a code and know what is not standardized in it. Be able to speak, for example, this one with the comma, with first name on the second line. What's the benefit of that? The benefit is I can comment this out and not affect any other ones on the way down. For the SQL statement itself, I would expect you to know what the order is. So the select clause goes at the top. order by, group by are at the bottom. What are the difference? What is it that it pulls? What would you expect to see in each one of these different clauses? Kind of ties into standardization. Data types. We have all the data types listed here. I would understand what is and what is not in each one of these data types. Numeric, you can't put alpha characters in it. Couldn't put first name in it. So that's the type of stuff that I would expect you to know. I also expect you to know what each one makes up. So timestamp makes up hour and date. Time is just time. It can be AM time, 1 o'clock, or it can be military time. What is CLOB used for? What is BLOB used for? Acronyms here as well. Relationships, I would expect you to be able to, if I were to discuss a situation, be able to tell me what the relationship is. If we had again, we talked about the situation with the township saying that a dog can only have one owner and an owner can only have one dog. That's a one-to-one relationship. Be able to speak towards that. Be able to speak towards many-to-many and one-to-many as well, and understand in situations what that relationship would look like. Joins. Understand what the different joins are going to pull. What is an inner join pull as opposed to a left join, and what does a right join pull versus a left join? So I would understand those as well. Unions. When would we use a union? How would we join two select statements? Why would we do such a thing? And what do we need to have? You have to have these three things. The columns must be the same in both selects. You have to be pulling the same information in both selects in order to union them. Case statements. Again, what do we use them for? What are the benefits of a case statement? What are the two different forms? We have valued and search. What do each one of those do? Something that would suggest you refresh your memory. Views. We've talked about views. We talked about mostly about the advantages of views and when you would use them. What are the restrictions of views? Looking at it from the opposite angle. There are times when you don't want to use views. Why? What are because of these restrictions? Relational algebra. There are these different. I think there's 8. I wouldn't worry about divide. So look at the 7. But be able to explain. If I say, what is the product, algebra operator product? What is it? What does it do? I'd be able to speak to that as well. Relational data table characteristics. Be able to speak towards that. What are the characteristics of a table in a relational database? This goes along with it. Cog's rule. I would be able to explain which each one of these are. So these are what you need for a relational database to be considered fully relational. I would be able to speak to each one of them. What is physical data independence? What is logical data independence? And be able to answer that as well. Database development lifecycle, another acronym. I would be able to speak to each one of these. I know that there are other forms, other variations of a database development lifecycle, but for the final, we are going to concentrate on the ones that we spoke in class. So be able to speak to what is the difference between planning and requirement gathering, what is collected or what is completed in the construction phase. So I would go back and look at each one of those and understand and be able to speak to what needs to be accomplished in each one of those phases. Mission statements. I would have a high level understanding of what exactly it needs to be. We won't be looking at mission statements and explaining what's wrong or what's right, but just to know that it needs to be to the point. It shouldn't be really wordy, and it should mention specific tasks. Mission objects. Know exactly what these are. So these 5 points here would be something that you should know and be able to speak to for mission objectives. Requirement phase. When we talked about the discovering the users and the tasks, it's done during the requirement phase. What is it that you're looking for? Know that you need to speak to both your internal customers and your external customers. If you have an ordering system, you have external customers that place the orders. What is the information that we need to collect for them? in order to complete the order, and understand the process that they go through. How do they enter that information? How does an external customer enter the information? We need to understand the actors for each task. Who does each task in the database? So walk through that as well. Different modeling types. We talked about business plans. We talked about process modeling. So I would be able to understand what is in each one of these models. What does it do? What's the difference between a data model and a process model, and where it would be used. Building blocks. Talked about this for the data model. We have 4 of them. What does each one do? What's the purpose of them? What do they look like? The relationship symbols. If you were presented with one of these 6 here, excuse me, I would expect you to be able to tell me what each one means. So if I showed you the one and only one symbol, you'd be able to tell me that that's what it was. Understand, be able to explain what a well-formed data model is. All the tables, all the entities have been named. All the tables have names. It's part of being a well-formed data model. I'd be able to speak to each one of those points, those 5 that are listed there. High fidelity, what does that mean? What is it that we're looking for? I'd be able to speak towards that as well. Lookup tables, what are the benefits of lookup tables? What are they used for? What are lookup tables? Again, benefits of it are that you can direct a user, get specific answers, not free-formed answers. So if they're looking for state, you don't want them to accidentally enter the city. So you might have a lookup table or a reference table that would force them to pick a valid state. Functional dependency, understand what that is, understand that with the attributes. So we know, for example, with the yield, you have to have the stock dividend and the stock price in order to understand what the yield is for that particular stock. So yield is dependent on stock dividend and stock price. I would understand what a determinant is. So we talked about with course types, a graduate course or an undergraduate course have different fees in a database, or might have different fees in a database. So fee is a course type is a determinant for fee. You have to know what course type the course is in order to be able to determine what the fee would be. And again, I'd be able to speak to these different symbols and what they mean. If A determines B and B determines A, so if you have if you know the dog's name, you know the owner's name. If you know the owner's name, you know the dog's name. That's a one-to-one relationship. So be able to speak towards that as well. Normalization. I would know these rules and be able to identify. So if question is what is second normal form, be able to go through and say this relation is in second normal form if and only if it is in the first normal form, and that's important. We have to make sure that we put that in, and all non-key columns are dependent on the key. Be able to for each one of these, each one of the 6 that we talked about, be able to describe that. Naming conventions for your tables and your attributes in your database. Be able to understand, be able to talk about that. You can't use reserved words. We can't use order. We saw how that affected us when we did an Access database. We're not going to use special characters and spaces. So we want to be consistent across the. So if we name an attribute something in one table, student ID, and we do STU_ID, that's how we do it throughout the database. Talked about the confusion that can be caused if we don't do something like that. Talked about Teradata. We walked through that as an example of how information is stored. I would be able to speak to each one of the components at a high level. I'm not expecting a lot of granular detail in this, but what are some of the things a partitioning engine does? What are some of the things that the BINET does? Understanding which ones are virtual processes and which ones, what's software and what's hardware, that kind of stuff. Be able to speak towards that. And the final thing I would be able to speak to is space. So we talked about the difference between permanent space. That's where the tables are stored. Spool space is where basically your queries are run against. Understand the difference, and then the temp for the different temp tables. So I think if you understood each one of these slides, when able to speak to what is covered in these slides here, you'll do very well in the final exam. As always, if there are any questions or concerns, please reach out to me. Otherwise, we will do the final exam next week. All right, let's stop here. Thank you very much.